You know, as a everyday consumer, when it comes to laptops, we were kind of led to believe that you can either have performance or efficiency, but never both, at least not at the same time. However, when Apple released their M1 MacBooks in 2020, that all changed. Suddenly, it was possible to have both power and efficiency. It was living proof. And since then, I've had a high interest in the MacBook Pro as a product. 4 generations later, here we are today with the M4 MacBook Pro. And believe me when I say this is a fully loaded machine. It's got all sorts of things, and I really want to tell the story in the form of a review, of course, as to why this is such a awesome laptop, and also mention some things that might be worth watching out for, or caveats if you will. Now, keep in mind, I am reviewing arguably the most popular variant of the MacBook Pro for this generation, which includes the base M4 Pro chip with the 12-core CPU and 16-core GPU, the base 24GB of unified memory or RAM, and of course 512GB SSD. It also does come standard with Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3 standards, and this is the 14-inch variant. Now, like I said, there's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. In typical Apple fashion, you can expect some top tier packaging here. You get a clear representation of exactly what the product is and the appropriate color it comes in. Once you open up the box, things are very familiar again, so behind some environmentally friendly packaging, here it is in space gray, the MacBook Pro itself. More on that in a minute. We also do get a braided Type-C to MagSafe 3 cable for charging purposes, of course, and then we have a 75 watt-hour charging brick here as well. Past that, we do have the basic envelope, which has the user instructions as well as a microfiber cloth for cleaning the display. In terms of design, we pretty much have the same language as the previous generation MacBook Pro, so nothing new here per se. However, I still think it's aging quite gracefully. We've got a very linear and symmetrical look. I also like the slightly chunkier but again utilitarian look of the MacBook Pro, which I think works in its favor. You have a high quality build with a metallic exterior from top to bottom. Now, the laptop does have a slightly above average weight of 3.5 pounds, which actually goes to 3.6 pounds if you get the max variant of this laptop. However, I still think given the build quality, the weight is entirely justified. Now, when you start with the top side of this machine, that space gray color really gives a very subtle look, and by the way, this particular color is far more fingerprint resistant than previous generations, something that I truly appreciate. And then of course you have that shiny Apple logo at the center. There used to be a time when I used to whine about Apple's awful selection of I/O ports on their Pro Series laptops, but that's just not the case with modern day MacBook Pros. I mean, you basically get the MagSafe 3 charging port, you get two Thunderbolt 5 ports on one side, the good old headphone jack. On the other side, you have a HDMI 2.1 port, which is very nice, another Thunderbolt 5 port, and then of course a full-size SD card reader, something that isn't all that common in modern day laptops anymore, so I/O port selection again is pretty respectable. The bottom side of the MacBook Pro is probably my favorite part because it actually allows you to use your laptop like a laptop. There's no active air intake vents in the center. They're conveniently placed on the sides. The result is I can use this laptop wherever the heck I want. Thank you, Apple. When you unfold this laptop, you actually have a ton of palm rest space, a high quality inner metallic chassis, and keep in mind that space gray color does suck a lot of light, giving a darker feel to the machine overall. If you want something more vibrant, you may be better off with the silver color. Otherwise, I personally really like it. Now, at the center, you do have a larger than life glass surface trackpad, and my favorite part, of course, is that it's got haptic touch, and Apple does a great job implementing this. It kind of feels like tapping on thin ice, if you will. If you've owned a previous generation MacBook Pro, it's a very similar feel, but overall a top tier experience. The keyboard is equally as impressive. I mean, you've got nice large keycaps, easy to read font, a subtle backlighting system that comes on exactly when you need it to thanks to automatic sensing features, and you will notice you don't get a 10 keypad, which is pretty normal with most 14-inch laptops. However, you will notice you have two speaker grills, one on either corner. We'll do a sound test later on. As far as the typing quality is concerned, so make no mistake, this is a great keyboard. You've got a good amount of key travel, a decent degree of tactility, but I still think it's not as good as what Dell does with their XPS keyboards, and same with Lenovo with their Yoga series. Those ones just have more tactility and feel a little bit more premium. Otherwise though, this is a pretty fantastic keyboard and definitely one of the better ones out there. The hinge quality, as you might expect, is top tier. You can obviously open the laptop with a single hand, which is always my first judgment factor, and then overall there's no wobble, it's well tuned and well calibrated. As far as display fitting is concerned, you do have a modern glass encasement, so no sticking edges. However, you do have a bit of a noticeable chin at the bottom, though the side bezels are nice and thin and immersive. Same thing with the top. Of course, at the center you do have the notch where you'll find the 12 megapixel FaceTime or webcam, and it is very clear and does great across various lighting settings. Let's talk about the display because it really is a little bit more interesting this year. So from a technical point of view, obviously you have the 14-inch liquid retina XDR display here, which means you get a high quality IPS panel. You do of course have a approximate 3K display here, so everything looks sharp and clear. And of course you also have ProMotion technology with up to 120 Hz of refresh rate. Past that, you do have a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio. I also want to mention you get a peak brightness of 1000 nits with SDR content and up to 1600 nits with HDR certified content. Now, the real big boy here is the nano texture display that you can opt in for, and there's a few benefits. Obviously, it significantly reduces glare compared to a more traditional glossy display, which makes it great for viewing content. However, one thing that people aren't talking too much about is that it does have a subtle con, and that's the fact that when you have a lot of background lighting, you will notice it spreads out the glare evenly, which is good from a direct viewing angle, but if you're looking at it from a side angle, you'll almost notice this white layer that pops up that can make the blacks look a little bit more grayish, if you will. This is going to be a very circumstantial problem, and for most people that are viewing their laptop directly, it's going to be a non-issue, but one I think is worth mentioning regardless. Now, as far as color accuracy is concerned, you get a 100% sRGB rating, a 100% DCI-P3 color rating, and of course a delta E score of less than 1, making this ideal for creative purposes or just viewing content in general. A quick recap of the technical specifications. So with this specific model, we do have the binned M4 Pro with the 12-core CPU and 16-core GPU count. However, you can spec this thing all the way up with a insanely powerful M4 Mac chip with up to 16 CPU cores and up to 40 GPU cores. You can also spec it all the way up to 128 gigabytes of memory, though we do have the base 24 gigabytes with this model, and also we get the base 512 gigabyte SSD, which can technically be maxed out all the way up to 8 terabytes, provided you of course have the green stuff. Performance is a massive topic, and I have tested most general use cases with this machine quite well. So whether it's surfing the web or watching multimedia content online, all of it is going to be a very straightforward and easy task for this machine. It requires virtually no stress whatsoever. You can of course do full-time programming, coding, and code compilation, and again, even with the base 24 gigabytes of memory, this thing did not break a sweat. I had no problem working on Python. Even more demanding activities like Photoshop or let's say web-based photo editing is not going to be an issue. You have plenty of memory and more than enough horsepower. Now, if you are doing 3D animations, immediately I noticed that the M4 Pro does a pretty darn good job, even with the bin chip we have over here, with kind of just doing real-time renders and not lagging, though I will admit as the complexity increases, I did find that the 16-core GPU count might be a little bit on the lesser side, where you might benefit from getting the max chip instead thanks to the higher GPU core count. Now, when you do the most demanding activities like multi-layer 4K video editing, in our case, a timeline and DaVinci Resolve did not struggle to kind of play real time for the most part. We had up to 3 layers running at the same time, and there wasn't a lot of issue, if any at all. However, when you start stacking up 4 layers, or if you jump to 6K content, you will start noticing minor drops. This is again probably a combination of not having enough memory and horsepower at the same time. Again, over here, having more memory alone might be beneficial, but for 4K content, you're going to be just fine. Now, while I would in no universe or no dimension recommend gaming on a MacBook, that's just humiliating, honestly speaking, it is capable of gaming. You can definitely run any game that you can find that's compatible with it in the first place with some pretty decent settings. Also keep in mind that the M4 Pro chip only has a single encoder versus the Max chips would actually have 2 encoders. So if you render a lot of large files, you are going to notice a somewhat noticeable difference between the render speed of this chipset and the 2 encoder chipset that you get with the Max variants. Thermals on this device, as you might expect, are fantastic. So even when running the most demanding stress tests, the average surface temperature barely hit 30 degrees Celsius, with a more realistic sustained load hovering around 27 degrees Celsius, and of course a idle sustained load hovering well below 25 degrees Celsius. Very cool numbers, industry leading pretty much in every aspect. As far as fan noise is concerned, normally I would give you guys a fan noise test or a number, but I just couldn't get the fans to come onto this device to the point where it's like, does it even have fans? Yes, it does, but again, exceptional thermals. Now we get a 72 watt hour battery, and while Apple's tested numbers are quite high, our real world usage test case gave us just shy of 16 hours, which is extremely impressive regardless. This includes of course general web surfing, watching 4K content, doing some photo editing, and keeping screen brightness at approximately 50%. Now as far as speaker quality is concerned, the MacBook Pro continues to be an industry leader. The 6 speaker system here blows most of the competition right out of the water. Here's a quick sound test for reference. I'm grateful, oh yeah, able, oh yeah, I'm stable, oh yeah, no label, oh yeah, you know me, I have only a path, I'm lonely, but damn, I'm going. Apple continues to torture us and not give us any self-upgradability options, which means both the memory, storage, and also the Wi-Fi module are pretty much hard soldered, so please get the right configuration from the get-go because that's what you're stuck with until you eventually toss this device out or give it away. The M4 Pro MacBook Pro starts off at $2,000 and of course can go much higher. I think even at the base configuration, this laptop is more than sufficient for about 95% of all MacBook users. The fact is that it can do everything from general productivity or something like word processing, document crunching, to stuff like programming, to video editing, to extremely demanding 3D studio level animations. And that doesn't mean there isn't a use case for a more powerful M4 Max chip or more system memory. It just means that for a general use case, there really isn't an area where I was like, oh man, I wish I had more horsepower. Now, with that said, if you are doing 3D studio animations in a professional capacity or you're working with larger than 4K files, I would definitely recommend investing in both more memory and potentially having more GPU core counts with the M4 Max chip, as those will definitely make a big difference. But for the rest of us, this is more than sufficient. Also, of course, keep in mind that the M4 Pro is not exactly a chip that is, going to get outdated anytime soon. If you buy a M4 Pro MacBook Pro right now, it's going to last you for the years to come. Heck, Apple is struggling to sell these machines because the M1 chips are still doing so darn well, and that should tell you about just how versatile this device is. The only shortcomings, in my honest opinion, include the fact that we still get no self-upgradability options, so you're kind of held hostage to whatever configuration you get from the get-go, and the fact that the entry-level pricing is still quite high, so you are going to have to keep in mind that you are paying a premium pricing, or the Apple tax as everyone likes to call it. But despite all this, I think this is a pretty fantastic display. And finally, if you don't mind the awkward viewing angles, if you're not looking at the laptop directly with the nano texture display, I do think it is definitely worth opting in for. Let me know what you think of the new M4 Pro MacBook Pro, or if you have the more powerful Max variant, let me know your thoughts as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, make sure you hit that sub button and like this video. I'll catch you in the next one.